If you don't know what shoes to wear on your AT hike, I'm going to go through the shoes I wore, what I liked about them, what I didn't like about them, and suggestions for you when determining what shoe you should wear. Okay, so in the beginning, I started off with this Vasque, however you pronounce it, boot. This was like about 2 years old when I first started wearing it, so it was already broken in. I was comfortable with it. This was the first shoe I wore when I went backpacking. Well, actually when I went hiking, I wore it a lot, and then the first shoe I wore when I went backpacking. I really love this shoe. It used to be blue. I haven't cleaned it, and that's very bad for your shoe. So it is a boot. It is waterproof. It is no longer waterproof. I wore it until Franklin, North Carolina. So from the start in Springer Mountain to North Carolina, Franklin, North Carolina. I can't remember the mileage. That might be 100 and something miles, maybe 200. Yeah, I'm not sure. So for winter starting, I love the boot. I didn't have to worry about my feet being wet from the snow or the rain. Kept my feet nice and dry. I didn't really have an issue with my feet sweating at the beginning because it was so cold. I didn't get any blisters from these until later on. I'll talk about that. But when I first bought these, shoes are very hard for me to find ones that fit. There's a duck sneaking up on me. And I tried on every shoe at REI before I found these. And these were the only ones that didn't have any spots that rubbed my foot. Everyone's foot is slightly different. I went there for like a wide foot box, and I was going to originally get the Salmons. And I found those were so uncomfortable. So I ended up with these, and these ended up being perfect. I wore these through the Smokies, which I'm glad I had. Though at the end of the Smokies, it was so wet all the time, they eventually did give, and my feet were soaked. And then I got blisters. The other reason I got blisters was I had like the double sock. I had the Injinji toe socks liners inside of my regular socks, and I found the Injinji toe sock liners give me blisters. Every time I wore them, I had issues. So I got rid of those, and I got rid of a lot of my issues. So these were those, and then when it started getting warmer, I wanted something different, so I switched to trail runners. So I switched the Ultras. These were not the ones I wore. I wore the Olympus. I think they're Olympus 4s. They were like a cross between a regular tennis shoe and just a simple trail runner, lightweight trail runner. I'll show a picture up on the screen somewhere. So I wore those for about 1,000 miles, a little over 1,000 miles. So I pushed them further than what you're supposed to. And I did have some issues, like I had a hole on the side here where my foot rubbed it so much that it just split. So the Olympus I found are not as wide as the, what are these? Oh, the Lone Peaks. They're not as wide as the Lone Peaks, and that gave me a lot of foot issues. I really love the tread on the Olympus. They have a different kind of tread than the Lone Peaks. Their tread is more like, kind of like lines, and they're very deep grooves, and they were amazing. So after 1,000 miles with my Olympus treads, and I got these new, my Olympus treads had better traction still than the new ones of the Lone Peaks. So the thing I really hated about the Olympus were, because they were like more like a tennis shoe, the fabric on it would absorb a lot of water, and they were a lot harder to dry. In New York, I switched out my Olympus, or I should say finally retired my Olympus to the Lone Peaks, the Ultra Lone Peak 6s. I really love these shoes, except for the tread. I was not a big fan of the tread. The tread there was a lot slicker than the ones I was used to. And these are worn down a lot. I finished in these. These are the last shoe I bought. So I only went through 3 shoes. So I went from New York to Maine to Katahdin in these shoes. I really like these. As soon as it starts sprinkling, your feet are going to be wet. So no matter what, your feet are going to be wet. These just sort of dried a little fast. I wouldn't say they dried faster. I'd say a puddle didn't stay in them as long. So they were still wet. They just didn't have a full puddle. They actually held together pretty well. Where my other shoes, this little rubber piece at the end would fall off. These are sewn on there. And they stayed on. But this part right here tripped me a lot. I'd have like, while I was walking, I'd have like a random stick like this, and it would hook on and trip me. There is a hole down there as well. So these were really good. Not a lot of like support. There's no support. It's completely flat. Not a lot of cushion in there, but it forms to your foot after a while. And I mean, I liked them, so they worked well for me. For camp shoes, I wore just Crocs. These are off-brand Crocs, so they're a lot lighter. They're probably like 10 years old. They don't have to be anything fancy. I think they're from the dollar store. The one thing I would not recommend though is if you have shoes that old, make sure you have shoes that have some form of tread on them if you're going to do water crossings in them. A lot of times I just had to wear my regular shoes because the water was so fast and the rocks are so slick that I would no way stay upright in these because there's no tread on them. They're completely worn. So why did I have camp shoes? Camp shoes are optional. What I loved about them is at the end of the day I could take off my wet shoes and put a nice dry pair on. I could walk around with them without worrying, like when you're wearing flip-flops, you know, you're going downhill to get water, going up, whatever you're doing, you're not sliding around or when you go to the bathroom, sometimes the privy's up high on a hill or down low in the valley, and it can be very slick or hard. So just keep that in mind if you're thinking about camp shoes. I like these that, you know, they dry easy, they don't hold anything. They're completely, they're foam, rubber. I don't think they're rubber, like foam material. Plastic, maybe. Is when it was cold out, I could still put these on with a warm pair of socks. So that actually kept my foot a little warmer at camp. The downside about wearing Crocs is when you're at in hostel showers, you're trying to think about washing your feet. It's really hard if you're going to stand on top of them or take one foot out and balance. It's really hard to wash your feet. And then when you get out of the shower with them, they just kind of soak up the water and they don't dry very well. And if it's really hot out, your feet will sweat a lot in these. So those are some downsides. I definitely recommend wearing shoes in the shower. The very first one I stayed at, could have been one of two. I got athlete's foot, and that took a while to get rid of. Definitely wear some type of your own shoes. Don't wear shoes from the hostel. Don't go barefoot, especially in the shower, in the hostel, or, you know, wear socks or whatever around the hostel. So you can get away with just a simple pair of flip-flops if you're just going to wear them for like showers and stuff. They're like flat, lightweight. You can get some sandals. Crocs were easy, cheap, durable. Just the downside was taking a shower in them. So some things to consider when you're buying your shoes for your AT thru-hike or any hike you're thinking about is during your hike, your feet will swell. So whatever shoe size you're wearing now, I see a lot of people make this mistake that they'll go ahead and buy shoes in advance thinking maybe their feet aren't going to swell, and so they'll buy the same size, or thinking their feet are going to swell a lot, and they don't, and they buy a size too big, and so now they're stuck with shoes that are too small or too big later on. So I would buy shoes along the way if you could, and not in advance. and because you don't know if your feet are going to swell big, if they're going to barely swell, how your foot's going to change. I felt like my feet sort of widened in some spots, swelled in other spots, and my foot wasn't the same shape as it usually is. So it was nice to be able to try on shoes later on to see how they fit compared to just buying them in advance. Think about the time you're going. If it's going to be snowy out, if it's going to be rainy out, is it going to be dry out? Because that might determine the type of shoes you bring. Whether you want more like a waterproof in the winter, because you definitely do not want your feet wet in the winter. If you want ones that are not waterproof, that will dry better, but for the summer, and that's not going to be a real issue, just bring some extra socks to change. You're going to want to think about the terrain. So I see some people went barefoot out there. Some people just had Crocs on. Some people had sandals on, flip-flops. Some people had boots. Some people had trail runners. You'll find all different kinds. Cowboy boots. So in different treads. Some people had no tread left on their shoe. So I would say in Georgia, Tennessee, in North Carolina, you could probably get away with very little tread on your shoe. When you hit Virginia, I would say maybe semi-early to mid Virginia, you're going to hit a lot of areas that have rocks, and you're going to hit areas that have you're walking sort of on this ridge that's a slanted rock. So if you have no tread and you're walking on there and it's wet, you're going to slip and possibly fall. So think about that. So think about your tread. Think about the type of material you want. Think about the socks you're wearing. So if you're wearing really thick socks versus thin socks, how that's going to work. I found out that even in the summer months, I preferred my thicker socks. I didn't overheat in them. For me, they were just more comfortable. So play around with your socks also. Just because it's cold out doesn't mean you have to wear a really thick sock. And just because it's hot out doesn't mean you have to wear a really thin sock. When you're wearing your shoe, you want to make sure that your toe is not touching the end when you're going downhill. So when you're going downhill, you want to make sure your foot is not sliding into the end of your shoe. If you can feel that, your shoe is too small or too tight, and you're going to end up losing toenails. Fortunately, I did not lose any toenails because I didn't have that issue. Oh, which reminds me, so there is a difference between the tongue of the Olympus versus the tongue of the, what are these? The Lone Peaks. So this has a thicker piece, and the Olympus has a really, really thin tongue. And if you do a runner's knot and you're going downhill in that, which you will a lot, I found it was very uncomfortable because that shoelace was really digging into my leg or my foot. So just keep that in mind, the type of tongue you have here. Some people, it doesn't bother them, but that was really bothering me. So I was going really slow downhill. That was before, I was super sore. Okay, so with terrain, you also want to think about some areas are going to be really flat, really nice to walk on. And then some areas are going to be a lot of rocks, a lot of sticks, a lot of pointy small rocks. You're going to have all different kinds of things. So if you're wearing a sandal, think you're going to you might be stabbing your foot a lot in some terrain. If you're wearing certain kinds of shoes, it's not going to work well on a lot of these rocky areas. I mean, if you're used to it, that's fine. Wear whatever you're comfortable in, whatever you've been wearing. Just keep in mind that the AT isn't a park in your city that you're going to be walking around. It is really rocky, it is really rooty, and it's very uneven. Oh, and you also have snakes, so just keep that in mind. I did almost step on a couple snakes, so if I wasn't wearing shoes and they attacked my feet, that might have been different if I was wearing sandals versus wearing regular shoes. If you want to hike in Crocs, which I saw some people do, you want to consider wearing socks with your Crocs, just because you're going to get a lot of blisters around the weirdest areas, like such as in here or up here, maybe on the back here, if you're going barefoot in Crocs. So I see a lot of people there wear socks with their Crocs to prevent that blister from forming. What kind of socks should you wear? I would go with some type of maybe wool sock. You don't want cotton socks. You don't want a sock that is, I don't know, made out of weird materials. If you're against wearing wool, you can go with some other synthetic materials. I would just make sure cotton was last on that list. So in conclusion, here's my advice. Try on as many shoes as you can. Don't go by what other people are wearing. Your foot is different. It's going to feel different. Shoes they hate, you may love. Shoes they love, you may hate. So try on as many shoes as you can. Wear what's comfortable for you. Try it on with the different kinds of socks that you may think you may use. And buy shoes along the way instead of buying them beforehand. You're going to have a lot of foot issues, a lot of numbing, a lot of swelling, and make sure you take good care of your feet. Alright, if you have any more questions, just drop it below and I can try to make another video answering any questions. Until next time.